Hi, in this video I want to talk about CERT Unit 3, that's Disaster Medical Operations 1, and some of the adaptations and modifications that we've made here in CERT Brazil. First, always the biggest change is that you'll find that we have mannequins. We call all of our mannequins Bob. Came from our very first Team CERT course where we had a foam-filled mannequin which the kids christened SpongeBob. Now this particular Bob here is known as MCI Man. It's a professional mass casualty training mannequin. We have another Bob here. This one, poor thing's had a rather tough life. He started life as an inflatable shock mannequin I purchased on Amazon, about $15, the cheapest mannequin. After a while he ended up losing his ability to maintain air, and so we filled him up with foam as well. Now the idea of the Bobs is that we use them both for the casualty handling, head-to-toe assessment. We use it when we're showing how to approach a victim, and also when we're doing carries, particularly with the stretchers and so on, just to make sure that everything's working right before we put real people on the stretcher, the blanket, so on. Now, in addition to the mannequins, you'll find that when we start doing the Disaster Medical Operations 1, we talk about airways. That's when I find that the CPR mannequin is a very useful addition. Now, we don't actually get people doing mouth-to-mouth, but I prefer to have a number of mannequins. This particular model is the Mini Annie, which is inflatable, works well to be able to put a bunch of them in a suitcase and take them wherever we're doing the course. And normally I'll get people practicing the approaching, the checking the vital signs, opening the airways, just using the Mini Annies. It's something that just makes the training a lot more practical. So Annie, actually she can serve a whole lot of functions, maybe later on for triage as well. I consider another very important component of Disaster Medical Operations 1. Now, we talk about obviously opening the airway. I prefer to show models of just the airway masks if we were to do mouth-to-mouth. Obviously this isn't part of the CERT training, but while we're talking about first aid, especially considering the fact that many of our young people and many of the adults that do CERT in the context here in Rio de Janeiro haven't had a lot of first aid practice. So while we're teaching the CERT Disaster Medical Ops, we also need to teach basic first aid. Now we teach obviously wound control and bleeding control. Now we want everybody to use gloves, obviously. Now we may not have enough surgical gloves for the class, so we use those cheap disposable ones when we're training. Same thing with masks. If we don't have enough N95 masks for training, we'll just use surgical masks while we're training and explain the difference, why we want N95 masks in our kits. We want people to use the gauze and the bandages when we're practicing. Often, if we will actually reuse bandages. We have a box of bandages here. We're reused during training. Obviously in their kit they will have sterile supplies. Same goes just for the gauze, just as wound dressings. If we're particularly tight in finances, we can actually just use paper napkins or serviettes as fake dressings and reuse the bandages. So it's important that people practice with just stopping the bleeding, adding pressure, then putting on the bandage and treating for shock. Now, when we're working with young people, they often enjoy a little bit of realism. So we do make our own fake blood. What we use is, and I don't think I can really show you this without making a mess. This here is just washing up detergent that we just to clear a neutral flavour, and we just put some drops of red food colouring and a couple of drops of blue food colouring to make up this colour. I'm trying to do something here that's a bit messy, but we'll clean it up later. Just so we can show you how our fake blood comes out. There it is. Now this fake blood unfortunately doesn't last very long on a victim when we're doing our simulated exercises. We also have here another version. This is just cheap hair gel And once again, we just mix red and blue food colouring on it. And as you can see, it just makes a gooey, blood-like mixture that we can then use. As I said, the kids love doing this when we're practicing, and we'll definitely use these homemade substances when we're doing our end of exercise course simulation. Okay, let's talk about, one other thing that I show before I forget is I like to show them a tourniquet, just so we can show how you can make it, and we can talk about improvising tourniquets. Once we've done the basic life support, dealing with the 3 killers, obviously we talk about triage. Now I show them a triage tag, this one's obviously in English. We don't have these just due to the cost, they're rather expensive for training. And as I explained earlier on, we make our own triage tape, which is just standard ribbon. We can buy it by the kilo, and we just cut it up to make triage tape, which works great, not just for our training and our exercises, but also in the kits themselves. Now, as we're talking about this practical training, one thing to remember is that we do want people to practice treatment for shock, for example. They end up lying down on the ground, so we need to think about what the floor space might look like. We're not normally using carpeted rooms, so we will either have a supply just of blue tarpaulins, the minimum we can put on the ground. Obviously these are great too if we're using the fake blood, so that we can just hose them down later and things don't get too messy. Or over the years I've accumulated a few probably disposable, but we make them reusable American Red Cross blankets that we can put on the ground for people to, when they're using the annies, they can kneel on them and do the assessment and opening the airways, or if we're doing the treating shock and people lie on top of them. So we just use these to make the environment where we're teaching the course a little better as we go on. You just see what's happened here with our fake detergent blood and how it starts separating out after a while. So when we're using that for simulations, you need to keep an eye on that. Okay, let's talk about triage. Now, we do have some practical exercises. I like to do a lot more than are actually in the book. If you remember, I think the initial training, we put triage tags on people, and they will go and, each person will, maybe with a partner, triage them. Now I've made up different forms of tag that shows just the vital signs. Now I prefer to use mannequins or some other object, inanimate object, that depends on the situation. We may create a scenario where we have a bunch of annies with the triage tags on them. People go outside, come into the hall, they're starting to learn just the basic voice triage, calling out, and start to do triage, maybe using the mannequins. For Team CERT, I like to use our furry friends over here. We've just found that for the kids, there's something about having the toy stuffed animals with triage tags on it that makes it slightly more fun, because obviously we are talking about something that is life and death, and they may have to put black tags on these poor toys. And so just doing that with toys, I think, makes it less traumatic as they're getting used to using the START triage protocol. Now, when I'm traveling, and I actually made these up from when I went to Mozambique to do CERT, I just made up little people with the triage tags on them. You'll find that they're in Portuguese and English, because I can take a whole bunch of these, and once again we could scatter them around maybe a classroom or somewhere we're doing the course, and people come in and start to do the triage. But again, it's with models and not real people initially. So I will normally do at least two times where the team either goes out of the classroom, we quickly mess things up a little bit, and we put either the dolls, the mannequins, the furry little stuffed animals, and they start to practice triage, and then we bring them back so that they can see how well they did. I think that's probably all now for the first unit. We'll continue on in just a moment in Disaster Medical Ops 2. Thank you.